Just a quick background to what the City Deal is about. Sorry if you already know a bit about this. The City Deal has a series of aims which are very much around supporting growth and economic prosperity of the Greater Cambridge area. We have funding coming from central government which is intended primarily to invest in infrastructure to address some of the infrastructure deficit that we have in the area. It looks to accelerate the delivery of new jobs in the area, new housing. It's also looking at improving the skills base in the area because it's felt that the lack of skills in the area is one of the challenges in providing the support that's necessary for the growth to happen. It's looking at potentially creating around 45,000 new jobs. It's also looking at the governance arrangements, the way in which we develop these schemes and deliver them to possibly move away from the current arrangements that operate in this area, where we have 3 local authorities that are working together to deliver a lot of the growth that's planned in the area. We have the potential for £500 million of government funding towards infrastructure improvements in the area. And that £500 million potentially would be spread over 3 5-year tranches. For the first tranche that operates between 2015 and 2020, we have £100 million. And that's going to be supplemented by private sector funding, which will come through primarily planning agreements for the developers as they move ahead. Within that first tranche, we've carried out a prioritisation programme looking at lots of schemes that could be brought forward. But from that first tranche, Milton Road and Histon Road have been selected on the basis of improving bus movements, cycling and walking. This sets out the City Deal process. Like many of the processes that local authorities have to follow, it's a fairly lengthy procedure we have to go through. The slide sets out there various stages of consultation, and it's worth emphasising that in terms of the Milton Road and Histon Road schemes, we're at a very early stage, and this initial consultation will be followed by at least 2 further rounds of consultation before we get to a stage where the executive board that makes the decisions on behalf of the City Deal will actually be asked to approve something for both of those routes. The City Deal board has set certain objectives for the Histon Road and Milton Road schemes. They're laid out there for you. They're very much focused on improving sustainable transport. But perhaps it's worth emphasising that last bullet point there. The way in which we achieve these improvements needs to potentially lead to an enhancement of the environment of the city, addressing some of the streetscape issues and also air quality issues as part of the package that we need to develop. The work to date on the 2 schemes, consultants WSP have been appointed. They've carried out some initial development work, and that's led to the development of 2 options that have been put forward. They go under the heading of do something and do maximum. Fairly clunky titles, I have to say. Behind this, there's a project team that's been formed of various officers from the 3 authorities, and we pull in other expertise as we need as the schemes move forward. The initial ideas that were developed for the schemes have been scrutinised by the Joint Assembly, the City Deal Joint Assembly, and they have made some recommendations to the Executive Board, and on the 3rd of November last year, the Board endorsed these initial ideas purely for the purposes of public consultation. And I would stress that the Board haven't endorsed these measures in terms of wanting to take them forward for implementation. They have endorsed them for the purposes of wider engagement to get a feel for what sort of reaction there is to these initial ideas. All the documentation behind the work to date is available online. The initial ideas on Histon Road have centred around an idealised cross-section. We've looked at the width that's available along Histon Road. Of course, it varies, but we've said, well, there's a starting point. Let's see what this cross-section would look like if it was applied to the route. And it envisages 2 traffic lanes, a bus lane in one direction or the other. We don't have enough room to do 2 bus lanes in either direction, in both directions, if you wanted to do that. We're looking at trying to achieve better segregation of cyclists from other modes. We're also looking to achieve better segregation of pedestrian movements from other modes. So we've come up with this cross-section and we've applied that to the corridor, and from that some initial ideas have been generated. And this slide sets out a brief summary of those initial ideas. It includes an inbound bus lane, segregated or advisory cycle lanes at various locations. We're looking to develop better bus priority measured at all the signal control junctions to ensure that buses get better progression along the routes. We're looking at changing the nature of all the side road accesses to the corridor, particularly with a view to improving the environment for cycling and pedestrians. We're also at this stage floating the idea of this, what are known as floating bus stops. There are some diagrams available. You may have seen some early floating bus stops that have been constructed along Huntingdon Road and Kills Road. In effect, they allow cyclists to bypass buses that are waiting at bus stops. And it gives greater continuity of cycle movements at bus stops. The reaction to date has been very mixed, so as part of this consultation, we're asking you to give us your views on whether you think the idea of floating bus stops is something we should take on board, or whether it's something you don't think really fits in this particular environment. We're also suggesting some key changes at the Guild Road junction and at the Victoria Road, Huntingdon Road, Histon Road junction. And there's also the idea being floated, should we remove the on-street parking at the southern end of Histon Road. On a similar vein, we've developed a slightly different cross-section on Milton Road. The corridor along Milton Road is generally wider, so it allows us to put more into that cross-section if we wanted to. The only difference here is that it potentially could allow for a bus lane in both directions. And again, we have a series of initial ideas that have come out of that are quite similar to Histon Road. In this particular case, we have inbound and outbound bus lanes, segregated cycle lanes throughout the majority of the route. Again, this idea of introducing bus priority measures at traffic signal control junctions. Again, addressing the issues of the side roads and asking the question about floating bus stops. There are also some key junction changes at the Arbour Road, Union Lane and Elizabeth Way roundabout junctions. And it also includes some initial ideas about how we should tackle the issue of parking on some of the footways. Mitcham's Corner forms part of the Milton Road scheme. It's being looked at in a slightly different way. The City Council has done a lot of work looking at what should be done in the Mitcham's Corner area. It's identified it as an opportunity area within the local plan, and we started to build on some of the initial ideas that have come out of that work by the City Council. I think that the challenge going forward is to see how we can best manage taking forward the concepts that have been developed to improve the environment of the area, but in a way that reaches some sort of balance with the needs of transport in that area. At the present time, the gyratory system around Mitcham's Corner, from a traffic perspective, works pretty well. But I think it's recognised by an awful lot of people that the environment in that area is very poor. It's particularly poor for pedestrians and cyclists, and something needs to be done to improve the feel of the area. So we'll be doing further work, working closely with the City Council urban design team to look at the ideas that need to be developed in a bit more detail to see if we can strike that balance between transport needs and environmental needs. We've done some initial modelling. I suppose I could describe it, for want of a better phrase, as some quick and dirty modelling work that suggests if you take away or sever the gyratory nature of the junction, it will lead to significant increasing delays on the approaches to the junction. Some might say you don't need a traffic model to tell you that. It's sort of fairly intuitive that that would happen. So it is expected that as ideas are developed, we will have to do further modelling work to evaluate what the impact might be on the road network, but also to see what opportunities it opens up to improve the area from an environmental perspective. We're in the middle of the initial consultation process. We've tried our best to spread the word. Do we always make sure that everybody that wants to know gets informed? No. Sometimes we make mistakes, but to date we've had a pretty good response to the exhibitions that we're holding. There's one being held tonight at St Lawrence Church. And from that we're getting some very useful feedback, particularly from the local community, that will obviously need to be taken into account as we take the measures forward. The approach of consultation has been very much along the lines of these are only initial ideas, they're not proposals. We can't really describe them as proposals because we haven't properly evaluated them. From the consultation, we're likely to get a lot of questions being put to us that at the present time we probably can't provide a full answer to. But in time we will have to do that before any decisions are taken on whether these ideas are developed further or they're modified. We're also very keen to ask people to look at the project objectives and put forward any alternative ideas they've got to address the problems that we're trying to challenge. There is a questionnaire, a set questionnaire within the information leaflets. Some are available tonight. The information is also available online. We are encouraging people to respond to our questions. They may not fit your purposes. You may want to make other comments. We're more than happy for you to make any comments you think are appropriate in whatever form you wish. We've got two remaining exhibitions after tonight. We're at Chesterton Community College next week for the second session, and then the final session is at the Meadows Community Centre on Tuesday. The closing date for the consultation is Monday the 15th of February. So following that, what will happen? Well, we'll take some time to evaluate all the feedback we get from this first consultation process. We will then undertake further technical work to assess how viable those options are going to be in terms of taking it forward, and also to reflect on any other ideas that are put to us to see if they ought to be added into the mix. I'm sure from that process, some of those initial ideas will be modified. I suspect some of them will be kicked into touch. I think as I've said, other ideas will emerge that will need to be blended. And we'll carry out further work on assessing the impacts of some of these ideas. And we will start the process of developing a business case. Before any of the City Deal schemes are put forward for approval by the Executive Board, they have to go through a pretty rigorous business case assessment to show that the investment that we are potentially going to make actually brings about a reasonable return, that it's actually worth spending the money on the measure that we are developing. And the Executive Board will have to look at that business case before they decide whether they want to commit to spending the money that's been allocated. As part of the measures, whenever we start playing around with the traffic network in the city, whenever you make changes, there are often positive outcomes, but there are also negative outcomes as well. And it's unlikely that we will be able to develop some proposals for both of these corridors without having some negative impact somewhere. But we will have to look at the potential for a package of mitigation measures to address some of those adverse impacts. The Executive Board are well aware of the fact that it may need further funding to deliver those mitigation measures alongside the improvements on the two routes. Thank you, Chairman. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you.
and to the government arrangements for the City Deal, just to clarify. In terms of the three authorities that are involved in the City Deal are Cambridge City Council, Cambridge County Council, and South Cambridge District Council. The two other members of the City Deal Partnership are the University of Cambridge and the Local Enterprise Partnership, which is basically representing the business community, the private sector. So they are the partners that form the City Deal. When I refer to the City Deal Executive Board, it has 5 members. Currently, the 3 political leaders of the 3 authorities sit on the board. There is also a representative from the university and a representative from the Local Enterprise Partnership. When it comes, while there are 5 members, when it comes to making decisions, only the 3 leaders for the council have a vote. So they, at the end of the day, they are the people that actually make the decisions. The Joint Assembly that sits below the Executive Board scrutinises a lot of this work. There are 3 representatives from each of the partners that sit on that assembly, and they see the reports that are prepared for the board before the board receives them, and they will scrutinise, and they will make any additional recommendations or changes, put forward suggested changes before the executive board consider the reports. Hopefully that background is helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, on the process and structures, yeah, how's it fit?
Just what sounds like a technical question, so quite important. On the voting of the 3 leaders, does it have to be unanimous or is 2 what a majority as well?
I'm assuming, I don't honestly know, I'm assuming it is a simple majority, but yeah.
It's expected that they don't disagree. I can't remember the exact wording, but it's expected that they can vote differently. It's actually in the Constitution that they are expected to be unanimous.
I'm getting nods about that, so I think that's the understanding that it needs to be agreement on the 3 leaders. Okay, any other questions at all from councillors or from the floor on the process, the consultation, the structures that Richard Preston's outlined? Bearing in mind, and I'll flag it up now, that we have a special meeting of North Area Committee dedicated to these 2 proposals in this tranche of City Deal measures on Histon Road and Milton Road, and that's on the 4th of February. It'll be at Histon Community College from 6 o'clock, or we booked it from 6 o'clock till 9 o'clock. I don't know if we need that length of time, but we'll see how it goes. I know there's a lot of interest already in the special meeting of North Area Committee. So in terms of the details of the proposals, that is for that meeting. But any questions about the process, the consultation, the things that Richard Preston has just outlined, then by all means ask a question. And also, I should mention that the cost of recycling scheme, which are all, they are very relevant, and part of the current City Deal transfer proposals in the current consultation period is also something we should refer to. They want to refer to that. There are displays on the cost of recycling scheme, 2 of the projects affect the North Area in particular. So, yes, Mr. Bonds, I think you first one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Tomorrow night, there is actually a meeting at Chester Community College, which is organised by the Milton Road Residents Association with support from the Cambridge Federation of Residents Associations. And that is very much one that's going to feature some of the main participants. The leader of council will be there. I think you're going to be there? Yes? Not you tomorrow night, but there will be various other people who will be present, able to answer questions. What is interesting is that the proposals have galvanised activity in that it has brought into being the Milton Road Residents Association, the Hurst Park Avenue Residents Association, which embraces a large chunk between Hurst Park Avenue and Arbury Road. There is a rumour that an Arbury Road Association may be formed very shortly. And there is also a putative Histon Road Residents Association being formed. So one of the most important things is that people are getting together, discussing these things, framing their ideas, and seeing what they really think of it by talking to each other, which is as important as anything else in this process. Provided, of course, they then fill in your questionnaire by all means, but questionnaires to which the answer is no is quite difficult. So I'm encouraging people to actually put their views in more extensive form, because I think it's very important that you know what the impact is on individuals. And one of the problems, which is for another time, but it is the importance of you understanding what the impacts are. And the weakness of the proposals seem to be that they are placing inordinate emphasis on the commuter needs, who use the roads twice a day, once in, once out, and totally disregards the more frequent users of the road network, which are the residents of Cambridge, who want to go all over the place. And bugging up roads, stopping right turns and other things ain't the cleverest of things to do when you're trying to get from A to B, not along a principal road, which most of us want to do. So I think that's the things that I'd like to say tonight is, don't be shy. If you've got something you want to say, tell them, because it'll be too damn late after all the consultation's finished.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bond. And indeed, your points about the actual detail and concept and strategic thinking behind the scheme, something we'll be discussing in much more detail on the 4th of February at our special meeting on the committee. Right, I think Mr. Taylor had his hand up next, and then the gentleman near the back. Mr. Taylor.
Can I ask about what more information we can expect to have published before the end of the consultation period? The officer just talked about the modelling which has been done and mentioned that it's lacking. So will we get modelling which is better, that, for example, looks into the closure of the left turn onto King's Hedges Road and includes the expected impact of changing the traffic lights for bus priority and more generally? And I also, as we earlier in the process, I lobbied the Assembly, including our two councillors, Councillor Price and Smart, who are on the Assembly, to include in the environmental report the prospect of moving trees, which is technologically something which is done elsewhere, and also the pros and cons of planting more established trees. And neither of those things were covered in the environmental report to the Assembly or the Board. Is that something that we could have, so there's information on that for when the Board finally takes its decisions? I'd also like to ask, what is the aim of the next North Area Committee meeting? Will we see councillors and perhaps this whole committee actually take a view? Because I don't think there's any point particularly. We've seen, for example, Councillor Shutt say that the plans are absolutely abject nonsense when speaking to a group of her own residents. But is that something which councillors will say to the Board? Or perhaps is that something that any councillors have already said to the Board? So I think it's important that our council actually express a view.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And I think the substantial point, as I say, there'll be for discussion at the meeting on the 4th of February. And my understanding is that we will all be there to hear, listen to questions, put points to the City Board team. We'll still be in the middle of the consultation period, and all of our thoughts, concerns, issues will come out of that, all that part of that process as well. So that's my own personal view about the role of the meeting on the 4th of February. I did have a question from the gentleman in the audience, and then Councillor Price and Councillor Smart. Right, okay.
I wonder whether you could give me information, please, on the next two consultation procedures. You said that there would be 2 more rounds of consultation. And also I wonder whether you could give information on how this fits in with the central, with the city centre plans and with the A10 corridor. Thank you.
Chairman, it's expected that we will report back to the Executive Board on this initial consultation in June of this year. I think the plan is that the outcomes from the study that's known as the Cambridge Access Study, which is looking at a wider range of measures, possibly looking at measures to manage demand for travel to Cambridge, will also go to the Board at a similar time, so that people can judge the outcomes from both of those two to see how they start to mesh together. Because I think a lot of people have suggested that without knowing what's coming out of that study, it's difficult to put the Milton Road and Histon Road proposals into some sort of context. In terms of there's another study that's looking at the A10 corridor from Ely down to and including the northern fringe of the city. That's looking at the transport needs in that area in response to the growth that's planned. That also is expected to report back in the summer. I don't think we have a precise date on that. I think we're working towards June for the initial outcomes from that study as well. Although I would give a bit of a health warning with that one, because there's an awful lot of technical work that's got to be done for that study to make sure that the suggestions that come out of it are viable. But hopefully in the summer you'll see those three strands coming together so you can see how the bigger picture is evolving.
Sorry,
Okay.
I beg your pardon. The question was also regarding the second and third stages of the consultation.
Yeah, this is the initial consultation. You're going to have at least 2 more rounds of consultation, at least 2. When we have something that we might describe as a proposal, a preferred option, there will be another consultation on that. That may cover more than one preferred option. It may be that we're putting forward 1 or 2 or 3 options for both schemes. We don't know at this stage. So we will test that, and you'll have a more something that you might consider to be a proposal. After that, we will then report back on that second round of consultation. Then, as we get to moving towards a detailed proposal, we would then have to carry out a further consultation that would give you the detail behind the proposal, and also would cover any statutory processes that we have to go through. For example, for some of the initial ideas that we put forward, you'd have to introduce new traffic orders. There's a set legal requirement, a set process we have to go through that requires consultation. It may well be, depending on how the scheme evolves, that we may have to build in more consultation, depending on the feedback the executive board gets and how confident the board feels with the way the schemes are developed. But there will be at least 2 further consultations, possibly more.
And the timescale, please.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we don't have a precise timescale for the scheme at the present time. If we start pinning that down too precisely, then people say you're being inflexible. To a certain extent, we have to go with the flow of it on this one. We have published some initial timelines that, if all went well, we might be moving towards possibly implementing some measures towards the end of 2017, possibly 2018. But it's too early at this stage to give you precise information around where we might reach that stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. I've got a counterpart. Councillor Smart just had a point of information, I think. Is that right, Councillor Smart?
Yeah, Mr Taylor said that I and Councillor Price are on the City Deal Assembly, but in fact it's not me there anymore. Councillor Price is on the Assembly, but I'm not.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to respond largely to Mr Taylor asking whether or not councillors were going to come to a view. Yes, of course, we'll come to a view at some point. However, this is a consultation, and I attended the first meeting of Milton Road Residents Association, their inaugural meeting, at which a member of the public suggested that the City Deal Assembly and the City Deal Board weren't listening to anybody, that they'd already made up their minds. I assured that meeting that that wasn't the case, that as far as I'm concerned, we are listening. That's what I'm doing, that's what I will continue to do throughout this consultation. And once this consultation, or initial consultation, is finalised and a report comes, I will formulate a view and I will express that view. But I think at this point it would be wrong of me to give the impression that I have already made up my mind.
Okay, thank you very much. There are no other comments on the process, consultation? Very quickly, Claire. Work the microphone.
Thank you. About Milton Road, I was saying about the heavy trees. We need them for the environment. And the people on Milton Road, are they going to let this happen? I know I would have lived down there, I wouldn't let it happen. And I'm sorry, this trees need to be preserved. We need it for the environment. And I think, why should we change? and our traffic is bad enough as it is. Why can't you use Chesterton Road to put your park and ride down off Peaks? There's only the one bus goes down there, that's a number 4. No other buses go down that way. Have you thought about that one?
Yeah, okay then. But I hope you'll be able to come to the meeting on the 4th of February. These are the sorts of issues you want to discuss there. Gentlemen, yeah.
My comments about the consultants that have been appointed. Reports from some of the City Deal meetings have indicated that they really don't get what safe cycling facilities are. What they've put into the detailed plans for Milton Road and Histon Road are considerably worse than anything that the county team has proposed, for example, in the cross-city cycling deal, cross-city cycling proposals. How can we replace those consultants with people that actually understand what safe cycling facilities are?
Okay, I think come on, just the process will involve the consultants. You've got a few points about that.
Well, the consultants haven't been appointed to undertake the brief that we've given them. We hire them, and actually they'll run through to the end of this initial stage of the project. If I just make one quick comment on that, I think one of the things that we picked up, particularly in the last few years, that trying to define what the aspirations and needs of cyclists are is very difficult. Cyclists, by their very nature, have different desires and needs, and feel confident or not confident in different environments. Trying to please everybody's needs that chooses to cycle is quite a challenge. We have a proposal here which is a starting point for discussion. And I'm sure that through that discussion we will need to modify the initial proposal to try to suit as many cyclists as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Manning, and then I think we'll wrap this up.
Just two things. One, to briefly back up what Hal just said. It was chatting the audience speaking. I was told one part of the Green Road scheme that it was perfectly acceptable to have a design which had buses going into cycle lanes on both sides of the road, and that was regarded as safe. I think that's true at all. What I was actually going to say, and I know the Commissioner you probably paused there to be mentioning this, but for the sake of anyone in the audience who hasn't mentioned it, one of the things I'm really trying to push the officers to do within the context of the City Deal scheme is do as much as possible with live trials. So that's based on techniques they've used in New York for the last 7 or 8 years, where any elements of the scheme that can be done on a temporary basis, you try it out and you see what the effect of them is. Anyone's interested in any more detail, run towards me afterwards, or come to the meeting tomorrow night where I'm going to give a short presentation on it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I'll remind you that when we get to the break in this meeting tonight, there'll be opportunity for everyone to have a look at the displays on Histon Road, Milton Road, and the cross-city cycle scheme. And we have officers here to talk to members of the public one-to-one about those particular proposals. So, if we can move on then to, and a reminder to do come along on the 4th of February to our special meeting in North Area. We're here checking community projects at 6 o'clock. So we move on to item 5.